Here's your weapon system. Floor is yours.
Do I need to test fire this? Get an AD? Thank you, Chris. It is an honor to be here. It's an honor to follow someone the likes of General Stringham. I don't know that he's made it back in the room, but I'm going to tell a quick story anyway. In 1981, which is not that long ago for some of in the room, but for those of us that are a long time ago for me, I had the opportunity to go up and take a platoon in 1st 75th at Hunter Army Airfield, and a couple of commanders before the officers that were there when I joined the unit, then Colonel Stringham was the battalion commander there. There were some fantastic officers and NCOs and soldiers across that entire organization. I'm convinced to this day, whatever the number was, 575 on the MTO, on the MTO&E, that if you had made an order of merit list out of all 575 of them based on ability to contribute to the mission, number 575 at the very bottom of that list was Lieutenant Rosengard. Had one more dude showed up out of RIP into that organization, I'd have been bumped and never had an opportunity to serve there. I'm convinced of that. I got grabbed up very early in my time there by the NCOs in my platoon, and they said, yeah, you know, you're looking around at you know, Captain Keneally, then Captain Keneally was company commander. The younger Grange, Major Grange, was in that organization then. All officers and leaders worthy of being correctly feared. But my NCOs grabbed me up and said, okay, Lieutenant, you messed this up. Colonel Stringham, Smokin' Joe, is going to come back himself personally and choke the owl snot out of you. I believed that. I believe it to this day. I've never met him, and I'm scared of him now, right now, I'm telling you. So I wanted to tell him that to his face personally. I'll track him down and do it. I titled, this is the remnants of a briefing that I was asked to put together in 2002 after Task Force Dagger stood down. And I called it, Remember Your Location in the Universe. I borrow that quote from Jeff Lambert. I assume that most of you know who that is. He, answering the question of when we went to Bosnia, Nick, is he said it at Kisseljack. And he said it about a young leader, not going to name ranks or units, that lost his mind for whatever reason and forgot his location in the universe and went ranting and raving off somewhere, made a whole bunch of people mad, and then he got shot at. And General Lambert, then Colonel Lambert, came back into the organization shaking his head. That young man just forgot his location in the universe. And that quote stuck with me. And it stuck with me all the way through to Afghanistan, where I think that, how many veterans of Afghanistan operations do I have in the room? I'm sure there's more than a few. An unusual place, still an unusual place, and a place where you need to know your location in the universe and understand how your own location in the universe fits into the locations of several other solar systems and planetary bodies that float around in Afghanistan, and make sure you know how you relate to them, how you don't relate to them, how they relate to each other. So most of the lessons that I take away from my time in Afghanistan, inclusive of Dagger and a few times thereafter, are all about making sure we remember our location in the universe. And I think it applies to many things, not just the military, but it certainly applies to all of the endeavors that our regiment undertakes. Knowing your universal location matters. So if you forget nothing about what I have to say, I hope you remember that. And I attribute it to Jeff Lambert. Remember your location in the universe. So demonstrating that I think I know my location in the universe right now, I want to say, number one, I'm not the smartest guy in the room. That's a pretty smart guy right there, who I've known for a long time. He's smarter than me. Sean DeFoy is smarter than me. Nick Nichols smarter than me. Where's Mike Carlson? He's still in the room? Oh, I'm right behind him. There's another guy smarter than me, who you need to thank him. All right, because maybe about 4 months before I met my wife, we were in northern Afghanistan, and he kept me from running into a gunfight I didn't belong in. So, good to see you again. My perspective on what we did in Afghanistan is an SFOB one, effectively. I was the three, as you were told, of Task Force Dagger. I episodically got to where the ODAs were and got to see what they did and participated with them episodically, but most of the things that I carried away have to do with how we planned to employ them and how we planned to leverage their capabilities. I think there were a lot of things about our location in the universe that we didn't understand at the SFOB. I think we did understand some conventional things. We understood that we needed to apply mass and firepower, synchronization, things that are very conventional thoughts from a military perspective, but we had to do it in an unconventional way. We had to make some unconventional decisions to do with how we employed our organization, to do with how we sequenced it out, to do with who we chose to partner with, who we chose not to, and we didn't do all of those things correctly. We did enough of them correctly that enabled ODAs to actually carry the organization to success. So what we did enabled them, but I want to make sure I'm very clear in telling you that the reason the Task Force Dagger accomplished what it was sent to do was a function of the fact that we had some incredible Americans whose first name was Sergeant, whose first name were Chief, first name were Captain, none of them first name Colonel. The guys that carried that correctly were ODA guys. Some of you are in the room. A lot of you guys were on ODAs for a lot of time. That's what makes our organization succeed. So I want to make sure that you understand, that I understand, that our location in the universe is enabled by ODAs. So those are important messages that I want to poop on out there. So I'll transition to the mission that we received at what was originally just sort of north end called Task Force Dagger. If you'd build one time for me, Chris. Okay, you're doing good so far. You got to be a good tanker. When the tank commander says force fire, you got to say up.
I used to be somebody.
All right, there you go. All right. So there's a couple of things I like about this mission statement, but my favorite part is what it doesn't say. I'll start though by saying it does say do unconventional warfare. So I'm not so sure that isn't a unique mission statement in the history of the United States military. It's pretty darn close. But we did, in fact, though not the full spectrum of unconventional things, do some pretty unconventional things and do the things that were intended for Army Special Forces as we set foot into northern Afghanistan. Build it one time for me, sir. So as I say, it does say do UW. It doesn't say take a hill. It doesn't say seize an objective. It doesn't say destroy, kill, capture. It doesn't use any of those words. And I think that the fact that those verbs are missing from that mission statement makes it a powerful mission statement. But what you got to walk away with is the implied statements therein. And it was about changing the environment. That's really the mission. We had to change what was true in Afghanistan. And what was true in Afghanistan is that it was a sanctuary to Al-Qaeda at that time. And it was a place at which folks that flew airplanes into buildings in New York City, folks that flew an airplane into the Pentagon, folks that caused an aircraft to crash in Pennsylvania, a few other things. It was a place where those guys did basic training. And they were welcomed and coddled and enabled and supported in what was sanctuary to Al-Qaeda. So the implied statement was change that. Make that different. How do you do that? And we think we understood that. We think we understood at least what that looked like in the end. I'm not sure that even to this day we understand very well what the patchwork of that environment really is in Afghanistan, and that's at the crux of understanding what it is that we have to do. But the applied task was gain freedom of action for the United States. I think we did that in changing the environment, but we have to know what is the human capability, what is the human situation on the ground through which we're going to attempt to cause the environment to change. So that was our location in the universe. Build it one time. All due respect to the very brilliant people of the United States Army JFK Center for Special Warfare Center, which you recently leave the command there, turn over command. Thanks for what you did. When I went through the Q course 100 years ago, we were given a lot of instruction on how it is you figure out who are the right kind of people to be your Gs, just for lack of a better term. You get a checklist. It's pretty long. And we were looking at that from fifth group, at that time, kind of Neanderthal group of people. You love them to death. They're not 10th groupers. They don't think the same way. I gotta throw one disclaimer. So, you know, 5th Group, as I think you all know, was the core of Task Force Dagger. And I got drafted out of 10th Group to go be the 3 of the organization. The battalion commanders were obviously occupied, and at that time there was one other 05 in the Special Forces group, and that gentleman was asked to be the stay-behind commander at Fort Campbell. So they needed a guy long in the tooth to be the J3 of a task force that received a lot of things in addition to what a Special Forces group had. So I was lucky enough, because I knew Lambert and I knew my location of the universe. He was the SF commander at the time. Snatched me up and said, go do this, to Charlie Cleveland's chagrin, but that's what happened. So I can make fun of my 5th Group brothers, and that's okay. I earned it. So, but 10th Grouper at heart. So that said, we needed to figure out how to very quickly weed through, you know, what was a complex set of complex collection of humans, and a complex collection of tribal chiefs, a complex collection of candidates, or for lack of a better term, to be our partners in Afghanistan, by, with, and through whom we're going to attempt to change the environment. So we couldn't quite figure out how to rank order the results of the long checklist, but instead applied 3 very simple rules. And so we'll just, for lack of a better term, call these Ranger Rosengard's rules of unconventional warfare, which we applied in selecting our tribal partners as we ramped up our operations. And the first rule, which is really most important, is you got to understand where or what your potential partner wants to do tomorrow. Does he want to go be in charge in that next village that his enemy currently is in charge? And does that statement, does that objective, is that piece of geography, does that also align with where we would like to be? And so we have a common goal. We both would like to we would like to make that town north of where you currently are or wherever, make that objective is common to us both. If we have that one in common, then we can ask the second question, you know, which is, do you have a secure backyard? Is there a place before we get to tomorrow's objective where we can infiltrate to, link up with you, and prepare to do what our common objective is tomorrow? Can we link up today in a place and have a reasonable idea that is an okay place from which to start? A safe backyard. Where do we begin? Because if we're infilling to literally a denied place and we have to run around forever, how do we get organized to do what we said we wanted to do in rule number 1? So we got to have rule number 2. After that, you got a secure backyard from which to start. Then rule number 3 is, do you have lethal intent? Are you willing to kill somebody? Behind the answer to question number 1. You got to say yes to all 3 of these things. So we have a common objective, you have a secure backyard, and you're willing to kill somebody, we can probably do business. And that is about how we figured things out in rank ordering who it was that we wanted to go to in northern Afghanistan initially, and later to the south. Does that make sense to everybody? We made it that simple. You know, all due respect to the fact that there's probably a better way to codify that, Patrick. I bet you that you could come up with 2 or 3 better ways to do it. We did that. that's how we identified where we wanted to go, who we wanted to start with. All right, so go to the next slide for me, please. So the question becomes, whose side are you on? So with all of my fellow Afghan veterans, who recognizes the game that's being played here? That's called Biscachi, I think is how that's correctly pronounced. Say it again. Thank you. What I like about it is that it's almost as violent as ice hockey. As you can see, for those that don't know, they ride around on horses. What you might not be able to make out from the picture is that the object that is played with is a beheaded goat. Similar to hockey, the objective is to put the object, the beheaded goat, into a goal. And then they ride around and try to beat each other up and take control of the beheaded goat and be the one that can throw it in there, and they crash into that goal just as well as ice hockey players do, and there's not really too many rules beyond that. You know, they ride around with sticks, they whip each other, and they're trying to steal the goat from the guys that are not on their team. Now here's the difference. In a hockey game, there's guys with white shirts and there's guys with some other color other than white shirts, and you can fairly well tell the difference between Team A and Team B, a function of the colored shirts. Now you may say, well boy, there's some blue shirts there and there's some red shirts, but I'm telling you, that has nothing to do with who's on whose team. You just gotta know. And that's just brilliant. And that is part of Know Your Location in the Universe. So go to the next slide, please. So whose side should we be on? And we had these products with, of course, several elements of information behind it to help us understand who was who in the zoo and to help us understand a few different things. We tried to correlate it to geography. And correlating it to geography in some ways helps you understand the answer to Rule 1. Understanding the differences between the various colors you see on this map, where I apologize for the fact that those words are very small, but they're talking about the various ethnic groups and tribal affiliations at a macro level. It gets even more complex below that. But it's important to understand the difference between the Uzbeks, the Pashtun, the Hazara, the Tajiki, the Turkmen, so the Baluch, so forth and so on in Afghanistan. And there's certainly plenty of Hatfields and McCoys, depending upon how you want to color it. But we did our very best to understand who belonged where. What we only barely understood, though, was then the key personalities. And you can correlate one or two of those personalities with each of the significant colors on the map. That doesn't necessarily tell you what their particular Rule 1 answer would be. We didn't know this very well. We were aware of it, possibly, but we didn't have it very clear. Which of those guys were in it for themselves? Which of those guys were in it for their ethnic groups, autonomy and security? Which of those guys were in it for political, lack of a better term, reasons? Some of them really believed theologically that communism was the way to be, and that was the mechanism that would work best in Afghanistan, or some form of socialism. Rather than some form of a republic or some form of a federation. We didn't understand that at all. We really didn't. And we had read about it a little bit, but our understanding of how that impacted where these humans belonged in the rank ordering was poor. But we did understand where they belonged in the geography. We did understand what they would want to do on day one in the geography. And then I'm going to come back to talk about what the answer is to rule number 1 today. And we have to remember the fact, if we know our location in the universe, that we may get tomorrow with partner 1 to location A, and we agree that location A is good for both of us. But then we have to understand that once we get there, what does he want to do? And what do we want to do? We probably want to continue to the next place. He probably doesn't. In fact, he probably wants us to get the heck out of place A and leave him alone. We didn't understand that either. So there were some issues that we learned, in some instances, the very hard way as we moved down the path of the catastrophic success that occurred on the backs of ODAs in Afghanistan. But we can come back to this later on if you want. We can talk about most of those guys, and I have had the pleasure or displeasure of hanging out and drinking tea with just about everybody on that slide, and they're all different. They're all different. They all had their own Rule 1. They all had their own Rule 2, and just about every one of them was no issue with the Rule 3 part. They're all willing to kill people. Every one of those guys. Okay, go ahead, Chris. Thank you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how our campaign unfolded. So what we understood just from the common operating picture from a U.S. perspective, such as it was in October of 2001, was that the Taliban did indeed control the significant elements of infrastructure in Afghanistan. You're likely aware, if you're a student of history at all, that it sits, essentially in the middle of the southern part of the Silk Road. So if you want to move fabric and silk from the Orient to Europe, and you wanted to stay out of the snow, then you had to ultimately come across the Khyber Pass, and then there's this ring road. You can go either way to get on the other side and head out through what's now Turkmenistan and Samangand in that area, and then come back into the Middle East. And coming in the other direction with technology to the Orient, it worked in both directions. But the fact is that if you owned the ability to control these key intersections along the Silk Road, then what you could do is that you could effectively charge a little toll to enable and allow safe passage of your commodities, whatever they are, back and forth across Afghanistan. So charging toll on the Silk Road, that's an Olympic sport there. They've been doing it there for thousands of years, and they're good at it. They can control the intersection, and they can allow you passage or not. And the Taliban owned those intersections in late 2001. There's no question about that. We did understand quite well from Mujahideen efforts over the previous 20, 25 years that there were a few folk that didn't like the Taliban in Afghanistan. That was clear. And some of those guys were partnered with efforts of our nation previous to that. You likely read about it, and I don't claim to be smarter than most of you about how some of that went down and how it didn't go down, but suffice to say, we were aware of tribal folk that hated the Taliban, wanted to have control of those road intersections and have security and autonomy of their own in order to be who they wanted to be, which wasn't the Taliban. So the critical guy that had stayed for the longest time independent of the Taliban consolidation of control in Afghanistan was Shah Mohammad Massoud, the Tajik who was in the Northeast. I think you would read predominantly coincidentally, and I would put that in air quotes, was assassinated on the 9th of September of 2001. In hindsight, now knowing, and we'll talk about that guy a little bit, who when he was assassinated was his number two, was his chief of security. And I would ask you, how does a reporter with a camera with explosives in it get next to Shah Mohammad Massoud at all, unless that guy lets it happen? Just a question. I got an opportunity to ask him that once, but it didn't go very well for me. But that occurred, and we'll talk at the end about how I feel about that. But suffice to say, that didn't change the fact that this diaspora existed, and it was significant. And it was led by a guy who had some aspiration that I think motivated what occurred on 9 September, but that's an aside. All right, we knew about Mr. Dostam quite well, who's in reality had a bit more of a tenuous grasp on his pile for a number of reasons. But of all of them, the guy who's best answered rule number 3, willing to kill somebody, that's him. That guy willing to kill lots of people, not afraid. Okay, a little less kinetic and a little bit more in control of his area, and this was a curveball. But we had identified who it was that we thought were potentially best able to answer our 3 questions. Build it for me one time, please. So just some numbers to kind of back up what I'm talking about. We understood that he had, and we got to be careful about the fact that troops in that context is not the same as the 1st Infantry Division in Vietnam. That's a lot different. But it's 10,000 human beings with something that might look like a Kalashnikov that's probably missing a few parts. But there were 10,000 humans. So he had the biggest pile of people. We knew about Dostam, as I've mentioned. He had a good rule 1, a function of the fact that he wanted to own Mazar-e Sharif, and that's one of the key intersections on the Silk Road, on the Ring Road that we talked about. And basically what we were considering at this point is the fact that the Hindu Kush geographically runs a line about like this. It peters out some as you get towards the Iranian border. But that's, in the wintertime, pretty much an impassable geographic obstacle. There's the Salong Tunnel. It was marginally passable in those days. And in the wintertime was frequently closed. But the point is, we believed that we could help Dostam gain control of Mazar-e-Sharif before the snow closed down, and then use the fact that the winter would close this down in order to preclude the Taliban from even considering trying to come across in a counteroffensive of any kind. That's what we believed. Then to give us the space and time in the north of Afghanistan to bring into what was a pretty significant, for that part of the world, transportation hub, bring in reinforcements, build up some conventional capability, then eventually to run this way and go to the south, which we did not expect we would be able to do, really, until the following spring in 2002. Now, as I mentioned before, we had catastrophic success. It happened a lot faster than that. That was in some ways good, in some ways bad. But we had no choice. You know, our ability to slow down the Afghan insurgency from overthrowing the Taliban, we're not in charge. We're helping, but they had the speedometer, not us. So that was good and bad. But in any case, that was our thought process, and that was what the beginning of the offensive looked like. So our intent is to, you know, our center of gravity, what we really want to make happen in the end is, as soon as we can make Kabul fall, that's really changing the environment then. If we can get the Taliban out of power, out of the seat of power federally, and then break down their command and control such as it was, then that would allow us to, as close as we could, eliminate the ability of the Taliban to continue to provide the sanctuary to al-Qaeda and enable our freedom of action. So getting to Kabul was what we wanted to do. That was our big rule one. But we had some intermediate steps that we needed to take. Start in the north, give this guy the confidence to go into Kabul, and that was going to begin by taking Mazar-e-Sharif, which is essentially the way it went down. So build for me one time, please. The first wave occurring late October of infiltrations are those. 2 ODAs one at a time, obviously, and the ODAs went ahead of the ODCs. I'll talk about the ODCs in a minute, because there's a lot of discussion in why did we send ODCs at all? Why did we do that? And the quick answer to that question, and we can dig into it with the time allowing as we get towards the end, was that we knew at some point there would be a need for an FOB, or 2, or 3, and an ability to help us own, organize, enable with things that we are now much better at with respect to providing combat enablers and combat multipliers. How do we logistically synchronize that? How do we command and control it? How do we acquire things from the environment? And how do we manage and take care of air assets in order to cause it to get to all the right places? And rather than try to do all of that from Kachi Khanabad on the back of the Uzbek economy and the Uzbek government, which wasn't completely thrilled with what we were trying to do. We wanted to be the masters of our own destiny with FOBs in Afghanistan. So getting that started mattered. Getting a bit more seasoned guy in to be the advisor to those gents that we correctly, in hindsight, it's easy to say in hindsight, were going to become important people in the Afghanistan infrastructure in the long term. We wanted to get someone in there that wasn't going to be engaged completely, in a tactical fight, but instead was a rung or two above that in order to let the captain do his job and be an advisor for the long term to a guy whose rule one we wanted to influence. So putting the ODCs in there was a function of those things. I hope that makes sense. But there's a little bit of an unconventional application of unconventional command and control. But we made that decision and put those guys in there from the onset in order to set the conditions to do that. But those ODAs were with the lead elements of organizations within those 5,000 and 10,000 piles of humanity that we expected would be the first guys to step across the line into the reticle patterns of the Taliban combat power. So that's what we anticipated. Build it again for me, please. So this begins with lots of tea and lots of discussion and lots of effort into what do you mean there will be bombing? What does bombing look like? Who is going to control the application of precision-guided munitions? What does that even mean? And believe me, these guys their perception of a B-52 or their perception of a fast attack aircraft looked more like the cartoon in Peanuts with Snoopy and his scarf flailing behind him, with the biplane, chucking hand grenades out out of the cockpit. That was their, who is the pilot that's throwing those grenades down on, as they hear the voice of the female navigator in the AC-130. Is that the pilot that's going to kill the enemy? Why, yes, it is. Well, that's awesome. Okay, and he grabs the telephone and calls the bad guy, and he says, the Americans think you're such an unworthy enemy that they're sending their women to kill you. True. But we started, from the mountainous area, and this really, what you're seeing here is a very brief, cartoon encapsulation of a story that's told in the movie 12 Strong. I'm not going to tell you how right or wrong or indifferent I think that movie depicted how this went down. In some ways it was really close. In some ways it wasn't. That's okay. Glad to answer those questions later over a beer too. But the bottom line is that is really the first combat action that occurs, and it occurs as our friend Fahim, who wants to be the lead story, who wants to be the hero of he wants to be George Washington. He's watching somebody else getting the head of him. And the perception was a vulnerability to him. It was something that we leveraged. And we wanted to get him going. And a good way to get him going was let his political competitor get ahead of him. So that happened, and that was something good to leverage. But on the 10th of November, there's a couple of guys. General Dostam's the Uzbek. General Atta is a Hazara, and he comes from, kind of connected back to Karim Khalili. But in any case, that's two distinct factions. And we needed to understand that, and we did gain an understanding of it very shortly thereafter, but we understood it, when a poignant event that does get correctly captured in the movie is the two of them meet and shake hands as they enter Mazar-e Sharif, and that was very helpful for us, that we were able to give them a common objective that day, and then remember to ask tomorrow, we know that your objective tomorrow is not the same anymore, and how do we manage that crap? But in any case, that all occurred. Build it for me again. So we reinforced our success, and we had a couple of other guys that we wanted to get connected to as that occurs. We had identified a number of other subordinate leaders to Fahim in the northeast part of Afghanistan, and we put ODAs to connect to those maneuver elements, for those indigenous maneuver elements, and we put a guy out or an ODA out with Ismail Khan in Herat, and that was an important place to just occupy. And that was relatively easy to do. Similarly in Bamiyan, after the Taliban are now very concerned about what's happening, the things quieted down quite quickly in Bamiyan, and our ability to put an ODA there, the Rule 2 part opened up. So we had a secure place to go. And then being with Karim Khalili mattered to what constitutes a very significant sub-element of the Afghanistan population, the Hazara. So getting there mattered, and we got there shortly after the 10th of November. All of these things. Yes, sir?
So when did the additional ODAs go in? How long after the first couple?
Within 36 hours. It was very quick. Now, bear in mind, you've got me launched on a little bit of a tangent. There's a lot of pressure coming at us in this period of time. And it was, no kidding, coming directly from the National Command Authority. So the phone rings and the SFOB, coming from that part of the world, it's a Stu 3 at that time that rings, and they're wanting to know, okay, we need more Tiger teams on the ground. We got to get more bombs dropped. Who do you think answered that phone? You'd be correct, the 3 answers that phone. Okay, so that got to be old quickly. But my point is, we did have, influencing some of our decisions, a lot of pressure from home. You guys got to get more done. You guys got to get, no one else is getting anything done. We don't have any lights, lit up in southern Afghanistan to launch, some of the strike forces that also existed. Sort South existed, Task Force Sabre existed, there were K-Bar existed, there were other organizations that were there to do strike. And their mission statement didn't say unconventional warfare. Their mission statement had the other more military verbs in, close with, capture, destroy, kill. You know, good military statements. But I like those statements. But ours was different, and we were the ones able to set foot in the ground and stay there. And that's what mattered. But the answer to your question is quick. And that was a combination of two things. One, weather. Two, pressure. Answer your question.
Absolutely.
All right.
At the Pentagon at the time. I put it to you.
Was it you that was calling me? Because I'll get General Stringer back in the room, because I need to get you to be afraid. Okay, one more time, Chris. So he began, this is now Fahim on the yellow box, he began really over the next 24 hours after Mazar falls, and the additional ODAs are coming in really simultaneously. Within, you draw a box around 48 hours, and it all is happening in a pretty quick, very event-intensive, for an SFOB perspective, period of time, as we're moving guys in. But he began to attack, and it took him, he had a little bit of a fight right near the vicinity of Bagram, what we now, we've recently left it, but many of us knew well, Bagram Air Base. Just south of that, coming out of the Shamali Plain, he had a little bit of a good fight, and he got helped by some, friends of the United States Air Force that in that environment were able to apply precision munitions very effectively. So that helped him a lot. But by the time he arrives at the northern boundaries of what is the city of Kabul, the Taliban had essentially evacuated. So he rolls into Kabul unopposed. And that was awesome. And that lots of cheers and lots of catastrophic success happening immediately on the back end of that. So build it again for me, please. So literally within hours of the news and the cell phones, the satellite phones, as they were letting those gentlemen know that Kabul had fallen. Mr. Khalili walks into the governor's palace in Bamiyan. Mr. Khan walks into the governor's palace in Herat and raise their flags and declare that they own it. So that all happens quickly. At this point, we know that the Taliban had effectively abrogated their capability in all but the most southern of the transportation nexes in Afghanistan. So the one that's left is that one in Kandahar. Now, in the most simplistic of terms, again, the line, you got the ethnic morass that is north of that, and then you have Pashtunistan south of the Hindu Kush predominantly. There are exceptions to that. But understanding that basic division in Afghanistan matters, and we knew that it would take some time in order to cause Kandahar to similarly fall. And we thought it would take longer than it in fact did. But that's where we were in starting the offensive. One more build. So in the confusion of all of those things occurring, we were able to get Hamid Karzai, who we understood for a lot of reasons was the right, in our opinion, the rightist guy to be the de facto leader of the Pashtun movement against what is a Pashtun-based Taliban movement. We were able to generate Rule 2 for him. He really didn't have a secure backyard anyplace, and he's from Turnkout, and that is in about here. I think it's on the map. It's right there. All right, but we got him located in Pakistan to a spot where the Pakistani, with some reluctance, gave us access to a base that we were able to get him connected with an ODA and start to make some plans. And we got him in the fog of all of that noise. We got him inserted into a place north of Turnkout where we had some visibility for a few reasons and thought that we could create the Rule 2 safe backyard from which to start for Hamid Karzai. Turned out to be very important, one of the better decisions we made. Go ahead. So we needed to consolidate what we had in the north and try to get that to work in the south. So what you see right now is just kind of a sized down depiction of all of the elements that I had on the previous slide at the end of all the builds. So that's what you see. And we started to build upon this sum. So build it for me one time. A more traditional unconventional application of what our command and control structures look like. We put ODBs at the Mazar airfield and at Bagram in order to do what we would commonly, at least then, what we would commonly refer to as an ISB. And give that B team the responsibility to do some logistics work, to be a communications relay node. But an ODB has, as compared to an FOB, the company headquarters compared to a battalion headquarters, two different sets of resources. So there's a limit, of course, to what you can ask an ODB to do. But making sure ODAs stay to task is certainly on their list of things. And they did that, and getting set up to enable logistics distribution was something that they were able to begin. So we put ODBs in to start to consolidate our positions in the north at Bagram and at Mazar. Build again. What happened at that time then, shortly thereafter, is the fact that with what was 3 different prongs coming at the city of Kunduz from 3 different ethnic factions. One is Ata, the Hazara, one is Dostam, the Uzbek, and one is, and his name escapes me at the moment, doesn't matter, but he was a subordinate to Fahim Khan, who was from that part, from Taliban. And he was from that part of Afghanistan, and he came from the east. So you have these 3 arrows that's caused a lot of Taliban loyalists to be surrounded in Taliban, and that begat the circus that ultimately ended at Kuala Jangi with the uprising that caused Mike Spann's death and some other problems. It's an entire story can be told with respect to how we watched the Dostam, who was the most equal among those 3 equals. For a few reasons, he decided he was going to take charge of the, quote, prisoners, and he was going to show us how a traditional Afghan surrender would be managed. Circus. And I'll leave it at that, and we can come back and talk about that some, at the end if you want to ask questions about it. But that occurred and ultimately caused us to put a few more assets at it. So build again. So we sent some help to help resolve the problems at Kuala Jangi. Build it again. Then we were looking to try to get the access across the Hindu Kush and the Ceylon Pass in particular. There was a tribal chief who wasn't exactly aligned with anybody that we were aligned with at that moment. Name was Jafari, and that guy sold his Rule 1 to us very nicely. Geez, we've got to be careful of that. Turned out not to be exactly forthright in what it was that he was telling us he wanted to do. But he not only wanted to get to the pass, he wanted to get beyond the pass, and he wanted to start killing this guy, not the Taliban. So we had a small problem there with one of our indigenous organizations trying to fight another of our indigenous organizations. And what the ODA did not realize is that they're calling bombs to be dropped on the organization that this ODA is with. So we didn't have any significant green-on-green casualties, but we did get a lot of people excited. And we did make the decision that, you know what, we probably ought not hang out with you anymore, Mr. Jafari, and we pulled that ODA back out. So that's an unconventional decision that was conventionally necessary. But that occurred, lesson learned. You got to make sure you believe, make them prove that their answer to rule number 1 is in fact forthright. It was not. That'll happen. It'll happen in a lot of places, not just Afghanistan. It happened in Iraq once or twice too. Did it not, sir? I know you know. All right, so go ahead and build again. So then, shortly thereafter, we get Karzai motivated to head with his pile that we were able to recruit. He was very good in a lot of ways. He had wasta, good word. He had a lot of connection. He had a lot of pull. He had a lot of friends, and he was able to assemble a force that we didn't expect was going to, all come together for what was proven a reasonably consistent common purpose. And he headed south, and just beyond Turncout, we saw, for the one time that we saw it in this entire first phase of the operation, was after the Taliban had left with their vehicles and what combat power they possessed. They headed south towards Kandahar, and then reorganized and came back in a counterattack. Only time we saw that. Interesting thing. That gets your blood pressure up. It makes you drink a little bit more coffee than you otherwise would. So we had to figure out, now what do we do? And this is a very here they come. This is very quick. This is not something we had a chance to, sit back and make another pot of coffee. We had to finish the cup we had and do something, which was to divert to the best of our ability some air assets to that place. And our JTACs there had the very, very time-sensitive requirement to attempt to orchestrate that, which they did quite well with one exception. And we did have, one precision-guided munition come right down on our own location. At that place, we lost a few tremendous, ODA soldiers and took a lot of casualties, as did our Afghan brothers take some casualties. So that's of course a terrible thing. You wind up trying to wonder what some of the lessons learned on the backside of that are, and there are some errors and mistakes and some things that could have been done, in the SFOB, where there's, somebody who was the J3 who's responsible for clearance of fires, don't you think? All right, well, that keeps me awake at night to this day, and I'll take it in my grave. But that's something that happened, and we learned from it, but then we made what I would consider probably the best decision that we made on the backside of that. So if you build it one time, is that we reinforced failure. So write that one down, okay? Most of the time in conventional military thought, you'll hear folks talking about you got to reinforce success, you got to withdraw from failure. Don't reinforce failure. Don't put good money after bad. Don't put good soldiers and their lives after bad. Don't do that. In this case, knowing what we had with Karzai, knowing that this was the first time that we had had a problem like this, even remotely resembling a problem like this in this catastrophic success that's occurring over a period of just 3 weeks, we decided that we needed to prove to Karzai and to his loyal guys that are standing there, we are serious. Yes, we got our nose bloodied, so did you. We know it. We're not walking away. We're here to be with you all the way through at the end of this, whatever end means. And 20 years later, we realize it's a little bit different end, but that's another story for another time. We decided to put a little bit more Special Forces combat power at that. So just as a matter of statement, the ODB commander of that little brown box right there was a fellow by the name of Chris Miller, who became the Secretary of Defense. Didn't turn out too bad for him. But that's a good man, and we sent him for a reason. And he demonstrated that he had the skill and the ability to communicate and the ability to build a team, reinforce a team that then served all of us well over many years. But we reinforced failure in order to make sure that we didn't lose the success that we had achieved, and we wanted Karzai and his loyal followers to know that we were not going to walk away just because we got our nose bloodied. We're in. So that decision, I would suggest, is the best one we made in the entire period of Task Force Dagger. And we continued through, kept Tarrant Count. We had turned away that counterattack, and then Karzai is able to continue towards Kandahar. Build again. At the same time, again, as the fog is happening, there was a guy down by Spin Boldock that we were aware of, who was, General Sherzai, another Pashtun. Just a quick observation about that gentleman. Later on, what I just found incredibly funny was that as everything's done and the Bonn Accords happened and we're trying to put a government into Kabul, this guy shows up with a picture on a ballot in a suit and a tie. Seriously. Okay, that's all right. You cleaned up fairly well, but I know better. As we were closing on Kandahar and we had taken some Taliban prisoners and we're going to turn them over to the Afghans. I mean, that's their prisoners, not ours. And it became clear to them that we were sending them to go be under this guy's management. Please keep me. Don't send me to, he'll eat us. Don't send us to him. That's awful. And they just viewed him as Jabba the Hutt. But we saw him with the suit and the tie later and just thought that was incredible. All right, so enough of that. Build it one more time. After all of that, the United States Marine Corps came and they took Objective Rhino for about 36 hours, and that made more noise and more appeared. Any Marines in the room? You got an Army uniform on, dude. Okay, love the Marine Corps, so for the record, all right? They got more media mileage out of that 36 hours than everything that Task Force DAGGER done at that point, I'm just saying. So they did it, all right? And they showed up, but in reality, you know, kidding aside, what that accomplished was a function of this being true with that ODA, a function of all of that being true and staying true towards Kandahar, and a function of that show of force at that location with an ODB that was the liaison function, you know, softly to the Marine Corps that went in there. That then caused the Taliban to go to ground in Kandahar as they're surrounded. So build it one last time, and you'll see that by the first week, shortly thereafter of December, Kandahar falls, and now we have accomplished what was the center of gravity for us all the way around the Ring Road in Afghanistan. So that really concludes what is the first phase of our unconventional operation, and it now starts to transition to what next? To what next? So coming back to, you got to remember your location in the universe, what's next for us, what's next for these gentlemen that now have walked into the governor's palace in their respective places that they've been wanting to do for 20 years, but been precluded by the Taliban. How do we stay friends with them? So there's another checklist that you get. Thank you. You guys did a good job maintaining the checklist. I appreciate it. You know, that says, how do you know when it's time to leave the G-base? How do you know? All right. You know, you get some, you know, indicators here. Maybe they don't invite you to the dinner all the time. You know, maybe they go off and do things on their own. All right. But what you don't see on the checklist is this. How about when Fahim Khan looks you in the eye and he says, "Get the F out." Single entry checklist right there. That happened. Okay. So we had some, you know, we were told, you know, we don't need you anymore. We're going to put you in this house over here, and we're going to be on all the facilities that we need to be in Kabul, and we don't want you in there with us every day. That should have told us a number of things, but you know, we still were invited to dinner. We still were, you know, occasionally consulted, and we were still asked for help. That's for sure. You know, but we weren't, you know, right there locked arm in arm with all of these guys all of the time, as we had been for the first, you know, 6-8 weeks of this operation. They started to gain of their choosing some distance from us. So we had to figure out why and how to minimize the impact of that on our Rule 1. Okay, so go ahead, go to the next slide. More pressure from home. Where is Osama bin Laden? Okay, well, I'm not really sure we know the answer to that question. Was he in Afghanistan? Probably. Was he going somewhere else if the Taliban refused to or were no longer able to keep him, you know, with some sort of sanctuary? Probably would leave. Where is he going? Well, we had some indicators that said he went to Tora Bora, and we chased that with General Ali, with Hazrat Ali. But what folks, and that's what there was that's John Silkman, by the way, for those who know John Silkman. That was his ODB and his ODAs. Sent into a piece of geography that's as big as the state of Connecticut, and that has mountains in it that are 6,000 feet again higher than this one behind us, you know, at 20K. And that's Tora Bora. And we're going to send, you know, 50 Americans in to kind of walk around and find a guy, you know, mixed in and amongst a bunch of mountains, and that in December, you know, in the foothills of the Himalayas. So kind of a mouthful. You know, if that's what you want us to do, we're going to give that a go. And we did try that. But that then begat a number of efforts that occur beyond it, and that did drive some of our thought process going forward. So go ahead. A handful of pictures that I like for a couple of reasons. You know, we had learned a few things to this point. We had learned that if we put our ODAs with some indigenous capability that allows them, you know, some awareness of who's who in the zoo, and allows them some, you know, local security, and allows us to blend in a little bit, we can pair precision-guided munitions with proxy war, and we can accomplish some things on our Rule 1. All about geography, though. It's about geography. It's not about really changing the whole environment. So you got to remember that the environment has a number of elements. Geography is only one of them. Then support ethnically, some sort of common understanding of values and how we're going to, what tomorrow looks like after we take the geography, that you have to get to. But we were able to accomplish a lot by enabling them to move, by enabling their weapons to actually be whole instead of in pieces. We rode horses, as you know, we rode that. We tried to look like Afghans, but we definitely had a capability at night that was something that was theretofore unknown in Afghanistan. The sun went down, the fighting stopped. The sun went up, the fighting started again from wherever you were when the sun went down. So there were a couple of times when we rearranged the Taliban thought process by moving forward at night, because we could, and then starting the fight from a place that wasn't where it ended the night before. And that you could see the surprise in their eyes when that happened. So we learned a few lessons tactically about how to change the environment to some degree, a function of, again, what ODAs did. Go ahead, please. So now for a couple of months, we're trying to do what we learned in the Q course. You got to do area assessments. You got to understand what's going on, what needs to happen, what do the indigenous folk want to do. We're improving our understanding of their Rule 1. But even after this much time, I think we only partially understood a lot of what we needed to. But there's a lot of things going on in order to be and stay as well as we could connected to the tribal leaders that had emerged and the folks that were in fact controlling these key junctures on this ring road, which is the geographic center of gravity of Afghanistan. We've got to kind of make sure that we're not losing our ability to control those places. We also did the best we could to build some partnerships in Pakistan that took several bifurcated routes down the road eventually that has something to do with how we found what we found at Abbottabad, 11, 12 years later. And it as well gave us an indication of what became Operation Anaconda. So build it again. I think you're going to get a bubble in here that says we started to figure out that all of the remaining combat power that we hadn't accounted for or seen smoldering or otherwise having it's evacuated where it was left in this place, which was to the students of how where the Brits had problems centuries ago and where the Russians had problems only a couple of decades previously. There's a book that says The Bear Comes Over the Mountain. We read that book. And that book talks a lot about how the Mujahideen defended inside of a particular valley where they had some infrastructure, they had some villages with some locals that liked them, and they had a capacity to reach back over protected routes to their sponsors, and I'll use that term carefully, and their ability to get there from here was enabled by their ability to control that valley. So go ahead. That's why Shai-Kot, that's the Shai-Kot Valley. These little red widgets indicate places where we had various intelligence observations, both technical and human, and we understood that there was a spot here, both historically and currently, that mattered. So we wanted to put our Tier 1 Pashtun, who was this guy Zia, to come into the open valley where he would be seen with the intent of giving whoever it was in this valley the same fear that the rest of the Taliban, other than the ones that counterattacked and turned out, the same idea. Okay, here it comes. This is going to be bad. And hopefully, if there was someone in that valley that needed to leave, we would encourage them to do what they would have been planning to do anyway. So the thought process was, we'll put pressure there, and we'll get, if it's Osama or whoever it is, it'll exfiltrate. And we had at that point now some built-up conventional capability at Bagram from the 10th Mountain Division. They had helicopters. They could access these mountain passes, and hopefully if we were able to synchronize and do it right, put the pressure there, get the HVT to exfiltrate, separate himself from the indigenous, that it would be hard for us to identify him from all the indigenous that he's hiding amongst, and capture him or kill him, back here on the valleys. That was the thought process of Operation Anaconda. Go ahead. So it happened. We had some forces in a lot of places that surrounded it. The main effort walked into a heck of a lot more firepower than we expected. The Taliban and whoever it was in there, really Al-Qaeda, defended that valley well and turned Chris Haas around with our Tier 1 Pashtun, Mr. Zia, and we had to regroup and come back in. We found a guy. In the meantime, Rakasan, the brigade that was really from the 101st, that was part of the task force there, still went in where they belonged and held and attempted to close with the enemy inside the Shaikot Valley and do something about it. In the meantime, we had identified a separate Pashtun who owned a handful of T-55s. So those are Soviet tanks, for those that don't know. And they actually worked. So that was kind of an anomaly in Afghanistan at that point, but they did work. And driving them into the valley helped. Zia rejoined the battle, and in a nutshell, within about 4 days, we were able to close and clear that objective. There was one HVT. I'm not sure that, I'll leave that at that. There was an HVT that came out of that valley that was killed. So it wasn't Osama bin Laden. That we can certainly say we know. But in any case, we did cause that clearly something of value to the bad guy because he defended it. We made that go away. And depending upon who you believe, there's some significant number of enemy KIA. We lost a few. Another problem of clearance for fires that keeps me up at night. But all that said, the story to be told is that the objective was taken. That was kinetic. And that mission statement was, close, capture, kill. And that did happen. So go ahead for me, Chris. We'll keep moving. So I'm going to just quickly touch on some lessons so you can open up to some questions if you have time to do it. So this picture, come back one. Yeah, that picture, that's Chris Haas. That's Mark Schwartz. So for those that are familiar with those players who were then Battalion Commander, Battalion S3 in the 5th Special Forces Group at that time. That is Gul Haidar, the guy who owns this thing. Notice that he gets to sit on the carpet and that Commander Zia does not, okay? We didn't figure that out until years later when we looked at this picture and said, you know what, we should have figured that out then. But those guys really weren't friends, both Pashtun, talking about the separation of Rule 1 in their world, a layer below what we were smart enough to understand. But what we got was, with ODA, this is, ODA guy, from 1st to the 5th, that are helping the Gul Haidar get his tanks to the right place, helping Commander Zia get his infantrymen to the right place, and helping that combat power make the objective clear for us. So you got that, but what we did with the constraints that we had, caused that to happen. We'll go forward one more time and we'll try to get to the end here for you. So, very handsome man, and then a gentleman who certainly wasn't capable of wearing an SF tab because his hair's too short, right? Paul Willey, Major United States Army, 10th Mountain Division, great American, who was the G3 Plan's Task Force Mountain. So what you see is, now you see I got a crayon in my hand. So that's my work of art, okay? And then the conventional military shows up and generates this gigantic synchronization matrix for Operation Anaconda, which was helpful. But I told him, okay, I drew this red line. I said, everything on that side of that red line, don't screw it up. Don't show up before that. Because if you do, you will make it worse. You got to make sure that we send the right message by perception to the enemy in that valley to get him to do what we want him to do. And if you show up, with a rendezvous with the destiny, here comes the 101st, dun, 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 here they come, right? And they get to that valley before the correct message of indigenous attack happens, then dude stays right where he is. He doesn't try to escape. And we lose the operational effect we wanted to achieve. So that was and then I said, but that little red box right there, that's what you do. All that stuff's beautiful. You do that, dude. Do that, and we'll be good. We'll be good. So getting the conventional and the unconventional synchronized was a command and control exercise and a command and control effort and lesson that we learned a lot from. We learned a lot about the fact that his Rule 1 is different than his Rule 1. And as I look at this picture now, some 20 years after that event occurs, it seems to me that right there, you know, we nationally, we the United States of America, then probably needed to figure out what we thought the end really should look like, and what we think our Rule 1 should have been. That's not my opinion. So I'm not speaking for the United States Army anymore, or the regiment, or for the general, or anybody else in the room. But I am speaking for me. Remember your location in the universe. Remember what your Rule 1 is. Remember that every day you got to ask that question. Remember that every day you got to ask your partner that question. And know that it's going to change. And if they're no longer the same, you got to figure out what you're going to do about that. You can't assume they're going to be the same. We made that mistake. That's the big strategic takeaway that I have from it. Thank you all very much.
We're gonna open it up for some Q&A. At first, though, Major General Pat Roberson. Pat, sir, I got to get you over to the Gold Star Luncheon. And this is the Deputy Commander for USASOC. We're glad to have you here. Former Commander of SWCC. Take care. If we got any questions, what we want to do is pass a mic to you so it gets picked up on the video for history. Anybody got a question? Okay, in the back.
So thank you for the briefing. As someone who was already retired by the time all this happened, this was very educational, so thank you. What are the lessons learned from Task Force Dagger and subsequent operations to today's UW curriculum? And what are some of the things that we need to continue to do in order for the next UW, which is our, I can't say specifics, but we know it's already happening, right? In certain areas of the world. What are those lessons learned that we've taken from Task Force Dagger into today's UW operation? Thanks.
I don't want to speak for General Roberson, who I think is more qualified than am I to talk about the lessons that we as a regiment have taken in to put into the force. But I can tell you what I think they are. I think we have to improve the way that our regiment remains connected to globally. We need to have a company-sized special forces organization that looks at a region, and we have to figure out how to draw the regions correctly. You know, when we arrived at 2001, they really, and I'm now speaking for the 5th Group, which I only marginally understand, honestly. And I've been now back to 5th Group many, many times, given that pitch and going into their task force skiff and talking to them about how they need to approach this. But in September of 2001, there wasn't anybody in 5th Group looking at Afghanistan. There wasn't. You know, we had some guys that had some time. We had some guys in 10th Group that were that old, that went back to Mujahideen efforts. We had a couple. And you know, there's no accident that a few of us found ourselves, you know, back in Task Force Dagger. But that having been said, we don't do the right job figuring out how we need to apply our peacetime engagement capacity in order to make sure that we are not learning about those personalities and that demography on the map at D+1, which is when we started. You know, there was we were helped a great deal by the fact that the things that came to Task Force Dagger from other government agencies included some veterans of the activity that had occurred previously in the behalf of our nation in Afghanistan. So that expertise, invaluable, unbelievably invaluable. Some brilliant, great Americans, some of whom spent time on our regiment. Billy Waugh, you know, is someone who might actually show up at one of these once in a while. But anyway, you know, those guys understood some of that, and we needed it, and that helped us. Rule 1, 2, 3. That helped us. But the biggest lesson for me is that we should be organized in a manner that allows us to at least have some capability within our regiment that is maintaining a connection to the human study use General Tovo's words, the human dynamic, the human domain, some of General Cleveland's words. So I want to give credit where it's due. But maintaining contact with those things that allow us to correctly figure out and predict how Rule 1 will evolve is what is the biggest lesson learned. The second lesson learned is fixed already, which was all about command and control. And we were a function of the way we were resourced as a regiment in the 80s and the 90s, which was, dare I say, marginal, is better. The problems that we screwed with in northern Iraq in the 90s lived in 2001 in northern Afghanistan. Same issues. Same idiot trying to run to a gunfight, didn't belong in there. But the fact is that our ability to do clearance for fires, our ability to do terrain management, our ability to integrate that terrain management with the conventional force was poor. These guys have fixed that already. It's already fixed. They're much better at it, way better at it than we were. So I give you those two answers.
I'm going to hold on the Q&A here. I'm going to go ahead and close this out so we can get you moving on. We're right at the end of our period here. If you want to stick around, Mark's going to hang up here in front, and he'll be here to entertain your questions. Mark, thank you very much. Okay, we're going to give you this Jiffy Special Forces Convention coin on flash. They're selling them next door, right? There you go. And also, you get the low budge, but a really nice freaking certificate.
Thank you.
Mark, thank you for coming here. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and your experiences. I appreciate it.